What would you do if someone tried to take away the one thing you worked so hard to build, not because it was illegal, not because it was unsafe, but simply because they didn't like it? That's exactly what happened to me. I had spent years saving up, carefully planning, and finally, after months of construction, my dream backyard was complete. A beautiful in-ground pool, surrounded by a sleek stone deck, custom lighting, and the perfect lounge area where my family and I could relax, entertain friends, and enjoy the summers. It was everything I had ever wanted, until the day I received the letter. It was from the HOA. My stomach sank before I even opened it. I had heard the horror stories, but I never thought I'd be in the middle of one. The first line made my blood run cold: immediate action required, unauthorized property modification. I read it 3 times, convinced I had misunderstood. My pool, my pride and joy, was apparently in violation of HOA guidelines. But how? I had followed every rule, gotten every permit, and made sure everything was up to code. Nothing about this made sense. Then I saw the signature at the bottom. Karen. The name alone sent a wave of frustration through me. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, you know there's always that one person who thrives on unnecessary rules, someone who acts like they own the neighborhood, dictating what's acceptable and what isn't. In my case, that person was Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, the kind of woman who would measure your grass with a ruler just to issue a fine. And now, she had set her sights on my pool. At first, I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I had overlooked a minor detail. So, I called the HOA office, hoping for a rational discussion. Instead, I was met with vague responses and scripted lines about neighborhood aesthetics and ensuring community standards. When I pressed for specifics, they dodged the question. That's when I realized, this wasn't about my pool. This was about Karen. She had never liked me, not since the day I moved in. My house was newer, different, more modern than the cookie-cutter designs she seemed to favor. But more than that, I wasn't the kind of person who bent over backward to please the HOA. I minded my own business, paid my dues, and ignored the petty neighborhood politics. Apparently, that wasn't good enough for Karen. And now, she was coming after me, hiding behind the HOA's rules to get her way. I wasn't about to let that happen. I thought the worst was over once I sent a firm response back to the HOA, detailing every permit, approval, and regulation I had followed. I expected logic to prevail. But Karen wasn't interested in logic. She was interested in control. 2 weeks later, I came home to another letter taped to my front door. This time, it wasn't just an HOA notice, it was a formal complaint, personally signed by Karen. She wasn't just saying my pool violated the HOA's vague aesthetic standards anymore. No, this time, she claimed it was a disturbance to the entire community. Too loud. Too bright. An eyesore that disrupted the peaceful atmosphere she envisioned for the neighborhood. I knew for a fact that wasn't true. My neighbors loved the pool. My kids weren't screaming at all hours of the night. There was no blaring music, no wild parties, just a normal family enjoying the backyard they had worked hard to build. But Karen wasn't one to let facts get in the way of her agenda. What really set me off was the final paragraph. Multiple neighbors have voiced concerns regarding the disruption caused by your pool. As a member of this community, we expect you to respect their wishes and comply with HOA standards. Multiple neighbors? That didn't make sense. I had spoken to nearly everyone on my street, and not one of them had an issue with the pool. If anything, they were all annoyed by Karen constantly butting into their business. Something didn't add up. That night, I went door to door, asking my neighbors if they had submitted any complaints. Every single one of them said no. Some even laughed, saying they enjoyed the pool and appreciated having a nice backyard in the neighborhood. But if none of them had complained, then who had? The answer hit me like a brick: Karen had made it up. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in with confidence, ready to call her bluff. The board sat in their usual positions, and there she was at the center, sitting tall, that smug expression never leaving her face. When my turn came to speak, I took a deep breath and laid it all out. "I have spoken to every single one of my neighbors," I said, looking directly at Karen. "Not one of them filed a complaint. So, Karen, I have to ask, who exactly sent these supposed letters?" Karen barely hesitated. "Some neighbors prefer to remain anonymous," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Not everyone is comfortable confronting rule breakers directly." I expected her to dodge, but what I didn't expect was for her to reach into her folder and pull out a stack of printed letters. "I have them right here," she announced, holding them up like a trophy. "Written complaints from concerned members of this community." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room as she started reading them aloud. "The noise levels have been unbearable. It doesn't fit the look of our neighborhood. We should not have to tolerate a resort-style pool in a quiet community." But something was off. The wording sounded too perfect, too rehearsed. And then, as she flipped through the pages, I caught a glimpse of the handwriting. They were all the same. My stomach tightened. I leaned forward, straining to see the documents more clearly, and there it was. Karen had written every single complaint herself. I didn't wait for her to finish. "That's interesting," I interrupted, my voice steady but sharp. "Because every single one of those letters is written in the same handwriting." "Your handwriting?" Karen's eyes flickered for just a moment before she recovered. "That's a ridiculous accusation," she scoffed. "I was simply assisting those who didn't feel comfortable writing their own letters." But the room had shifted. People were whispering, exchanging looks. Even some of the board members looked uneasy. I could have pushed harder, but I knew Karen wasn't going to crumble that easily. She had lost this round, but she wasn't finished. What I didn't realize was just how far she was willing to go. Because 2 days later, I woke up to find a city inspector standing on my doorstep. I opened the door to find a city inspector standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, looking far too serious for a random visit. My first thought was that there had been some kind of mistake, but the moment he introduced himself, my stomach dropped. He was here because of my pool. "Sir, we received a complaint that your pool was built without the proper permits," he said in an official tone, flipping through his documents. "I need to conduct an inspection to ensure compliance with city zoning laws." For a brief moment, I was stunned into silence. This wasn't the HOA anymore. This was the city. This was something much bigger than a petty Karen-driven agenda. But as soon as the shock wore off, the anger set in. I had done everything by the book. I had my permits. I had my approvals. I had followed every single legal requirement. This wasn't some oversight, this was an attack. And I already knew exactly who was behind it. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remain calm. "You're welcome to inspect the property," I said, stepping aside. "But I have all my permits on file, and I'd be happy to show them to you." The inspector nodded, clearly not expecting resistance, and proceeded toward the backyard. As he walked around the pool, taking notes and snapping pictures, I went straight to my office, pulling out the thick folder of paperwork I had meticulously kept from day one. When I returned, I handed it to him without a word. He flipped through the documents, checking each one carefully, and after a few minutes, he let out a small sigh. "Well," he said, looking up at me, "everything here seems to be in order." Of course it was. I crossed my arms, watching as he glanced back at his clipboard. "Out of curiosity," I said casually, "who exactly filed this complaint?" The inspector hesitated, his professionalism slipping for just a moment. "It was an anonymous report," he replied, his voice careful. But then he lowered his voice, as if he didn't want to be overheard. "Though between you and me, we get a lot of these from your HOA." One particular person, actually. A woman named Karen? I finished for him. His expression said everything. That was all I needed to hear. I clenched my fists, my blood boiling. She had taken this beyond HOA politics. She was now weaponizing city regulations against me, filing false complaints, trying to get the city to do her dirty work. I thanked the inspector, who, to his credit, looked a little embarrassed about the whole thing, and as soon as he left, I knew what I had to do. I needed to fight back. That evening, I started digging into Karen's history with the HOA. I scoured public records, old meeting notes, and neighbor complaints. And that's when I found it. Karen had been playing the HOA like her personal kingdom for years, but there was one thing she had never expected anyone to find. She had an illegal home addition. It wasn't just some minor infraction, either. She had built an entire sunroom extension onto her house without permits. No approvals, no paperwork, nothing. And the best part? The HOA's own rules clearly stated that any unauthorized structural additions were grounds for fines and even legal action. I couldn't help but laugh. The very thing she was accusing me of, violating regulations, was something she was guilty of herself. Armed with this information, I gathered my documentation and prepared for the next HOA board meeting. Karen wanted a war. She was about to get one. The night of the HOA board meeting arrived, and I was ready for war. I walked into the community center, my folder of evidence tucked under my arm, and scanned the room. The long table where the board members sat looked more like a jury stand than a homeowners association panel, and at the center of it all, Karen. She sat tall, her arms folded across her chest, wearing that same smug expression I had grown to despise. She didn't look nervous. She thought she had already won. The meeting started with routine discussions, budget allocations, landscaping projects, minor neighborhood complaints, but I barely heard any of it. My mind was locked onto one thing, taking Karen down. Then, at last, the board president, Dave Mitchell, cleared his throat. We have one final issue to discuss tonight. The matter of the ongoing complaints regarding a pool located at. That would be mine, I said, standing before he could finish. Karen let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head as if she were tired of my defiance. Mr. Reynolds, this is an official board meeting. If you'd let us speak first. No, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. I've listened to you speak plenty. Now it's my turn. A few of the board members exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably. Karen wasn't used to being challenged so openly. I set my folder down on the table, flipping it open. For weeks, I've been harassed over my pool. I've been sent false violation notices. I've had an inspector show up at my house over an anonymous complaint that, surprise, turned out to be completely baseless. I was told I was disturbing the community with noise when not a single real neighbor has ever complained. But what's really interesting is that all the official complaints you presented last time, Karen, were written in the same handwriting, yours. The murmurs started again, louder this time. Karen sat rigid, but I could see the way her fingers clenched into her sleeve. Mr. Reynolds, let's keep this civil, Dave said, though even he looked uneasy. Oh, I am being civil, I said. Karen, you've spent all this time using HOA rules as a weapon to come after me. But let's talk about your compliance for a moment. I pulled out the photos, satellite images of her property, HOA records, zoning paperwork. I laid them out one by one on the table for everyone to see. You see, Karen has a little problem of her own, I continued. She's got an unauthorized addition on her property. A sunroom, to be exact. Built without permits. No approval from the HOA. And according to the very rules you keep trying to enforce on me, that's a direct violation. The room went silent. For the first time since I had met her, Karen's face lost all of its smug confidence. she started, but her voice caught in her throat. One of the board members, an older man named Richard, adjusted his glasses as he leaned forward to inspect the documents. "Is this true, Karen?" he asked. Karen straightened in her seat. "That's completely different," she said, her voice tight. "The sunroom doesn't disturb anyone. It's a private edition." "Private or not, it's against HOA policy," I cut in. "Which means if you're going to enforce these rules so strictly, Karen, you should be held to the same standard." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The other board members were whispering now, exchanging uneasy glances. Karen had been their enforcer for years, but this was undeniable. Then, in a desperate attempt to regain control, Karen straightened in her chair and pulled out a final document, a thick HOA bylaw book. She flipped to a page near the back, her confidence returning just a little. "According to Section 12B, she said, her voice regaining its edge, the decision to remove a sitting HOA board member requires approval from the HOA president. Which, in case you forgot, is not you." She leaned back, victorious. For a second, the air went still. The realization sank in. She had been planning for this. She had secured a rule that protected herself. I felt a flicker of doubt, but then I saw Dave's expression shift. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and let out a slow breath. "You're right, Karen," he said at last. "The HOA president does have the final say." Karen smirked. Dave smiled back. "And as of this moment," he continued, "I am revoking your position. You're officially removed from the board." Karen's face went sheet white. You can't do that," she sputtered. "I can. And I just did." The room was silent for only a moment before the tension shattered. The whispers turned into full-blown conversation. Some board members looked relieved. Others looked stunned. But Karen? Karen was frozen in place. "You've been using this HOA as a personal tool to settle grudges," Dave continued, his tone firm. "And quite frankly, we're tired of it. Your removal is effective immediately." I watched as Karen slowly stood up. She stared at me, her expression unreadable, before turning on her heel and marching out of the room without another word. And just like that, Karen was gone. 2 days after the meeting, I received a thick envelope in the mail with the HOA's official decision. My hands were steady as I opened it, but my pulse quickened when I read the first line. "After thorough review, the HOA has determined that your pool is in full compliance with all regulations. No further action will be taken." I exhaled, letting the weight of the past few months finally lift from my shoulders. It was over. I had won. But the final paragraph was the real kicker. Karen had been permanently removed from the HOA board, not just for abusing her position, but for misusing HOA funds. The board had launched an internal review after the meeting, and what they found was even worse than I had imagined. Karen had been using community funds for her own projects, including that illegal sunroom, and had been quietly waiving fines for herself while hitting other homeowners with violations. The hypocrisy ran deeper than I had thought. The fallout was swift. Neighbors turned against her. She became a social pariah overnight, the same people who once avoided her now openly celebrating her removal. Within a few weeks, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of her house. And just like that, Karen was gone. The neighborhood felt different after she left. Lighter. Freer. No more petty fines, no more anonymous complaints about nonsense violations. The HOA, now led by Dave, promised a new era of fairness and transparency, even holding an open forum where homeowners could finally speak their minds. I went, and when I stood up to talk about my experience, I was met with applause. People had been waiting for someone to push back for years. That weekend, I sat by my pool for the first time in forever, truly able to relax. My family swam, the sun was warm, and for once, I wasn't worried about another notice showing up at my door. I had fought back, and won. The experience taught me something important: bullies like Karen only have power when people let them. Stand up for yourself, know your rights, and don't back down, because sometimes, the only way to beat a Karen is to out-Karen her. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.